all you beautiful people out there who have found and subscribed and are listening to Justice League Revisited. I am one half of the dynamic duo that brings you this podcast, James Enstall, host of Geek to Me Radio. On the other side of the monitor, I can see my wonderful co-host, the voice of Wonder Woman in this fantastic series that we are dissecting, Susan Eisenberg. How are you?
I'm well, but look, you made me blush.
Aw. Those of you who see, I almost feel bad for the people who can't see all this because you turn this lovely shade of rosy red. Would we call it Rosenbaum red? Is that
That's funny. No, that's made me very blushy, but thank you. And hello. Hello to you. Hello to you, my co-host.
And it's so great. I feel like the 2-week gap, because I know we've had a couple of people say, I wish you could release them sooner. This is good for us because we get the time to edit. We get the time to line up other guests. And I think it's a good pace for what we're wanting to do.
You know, I think it's perfect, and it allows me to miss you, which I do in between our shows. I mean, we text and we talk on the phone, of course, but it's not the same. And I looked forward to this. I can't tell you how much, because not only do I love this episode, but I love our guest today. He's just a delightful person, a kind man, and a very talented guy. So do you want to introduce him? Do you want to tell the peeps who we're going to have on today?
We are going to be talking with the producer and writer, Rich Fogel. Normally we have like this big introduction, but I just saw he's in the waiting room. Should we go ahead and just let him in?
Yeah. You make it sound like there's a bouncer here.
I know. Hey, like, Bruno, let him in, Bruno. It's fine.
Let him in. Sure.
We'll let him in. It looks like we've got Rich Fogel. We just got done giving him a small introduction. We're going to introduce him a little bit more here as we're going to talk. But the man, the myth, the legend, Rich Fogel, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good. So glad you were able to join us for this. We're for those of you, there's a little behind the scenes baseball. We're recording these a little out of order, but we had Rich and we were kind of looking at this episode and we needed Rich for this one, I think.
Yeah, we definitely did.
Well, how did you do without me?
It's been a struggle, frankly. We're doing The Brave and the Bold today. And when you and I talked about it, it's like, okay, it was a short list. It was like, let's get Rich. So thank you and welcome home. I know you were out of the country and had some like happy occasions to deal with. And so welcome home to you.
Thank you very much.
You probably thought that we would have a little time off camera and just have like a little intro, just the three of us. But since James and I were doing our intro and you were there waiting in the wings, we decided to just keep going. Is that okay with you?
Ta-da!
Okay. He's a pro.
And it's always fun because I like that the shows are always a little different. We don't have to do the same thing. We'll just, Rich is on standby here in the waiting room. Let's let him in and roll right into it. I think that's fine.
Yeah, it wasn't awkward at all.
Literally, I'm awkward. I think is going to be in my tombstone. He died awkwardly. I think it's just going to be the way I live my life. But that's okay. For those of you who might be just, wondering, this may be the first episode you've not gone back and listened to our other episodes. Every episode is a jumping on point for somebody. So for all of you new listeners, we are dissecting, discussing, and most importantly, revisiting the original Justice League and Justice League Unlimited series. This one is a season 1 episode, the 7th story in the series, episodes 14 and 15 for the show. Brave and the Bold. Part 1 debuted on March the 10th, 2002. Part 2 was March 17th, 2002. 1 week later, it was written by Rich Fogel and Paul Dini, teleplay by Dwayne McDuffie, and directed by our good friend Dan Reba. What a fantastic introduction to Gorilla City. There's so much we want to break down. Susan, do you have any questions you want to launch and just hit Rich right out of the gate with?
You know what? Not even to start with a question, to start with an observation, because I loved this episode. I hadn't seen this episode in such a long time. And I'll tell you something, that opening was as cinematic and extraordinary as any live action opening I have ever seen. it just brought me right in. And again, like as the as the people listening know, I'm more of, like Barbara Streisand in The Way We Were kind of fan. Like this isn't my, my genre really. And I'll tell you, if I wasn't a fan before, I am now, because I just thought, I mean, I have so many notes on this episode, but just well done, everybody. That's all I can say, because the writing, the directing, the storyboarding, the acting, it is just first rate. I don't think you could find a project that has, it's just dynamite. And can we ask you what your thoughts are when you were rewatching this? I mean, I'd be so curious after all this time.
Yeah, I think the two things that struck me. One is I think it's an overlooked episode, an underrated episode in it, that it's not one that people immediately go to. But I agree with you that I think it's very, very exciting and solid. And the other thing that struck me is that this one is the epitome of a team effort, that I can look at it and see where there were contributions every step along the way. And it also did a lot to sort of cement the tone of the whole series overall. And that's something that we can get into as we discuss some of the specifics. But the balancing of action and character and comedy and drama is all really, really there. Going sort of back to the beginning, one of the challenges that we had in approaching Justice League was how to make it not silly. And our mantra as we were working on Secret Origins and some of the other early episodes was, it's not Super Friends. It's not Super Friends. We're going to take it seriously. And I think this one does that, but it also brings a lot of humor into it. I think it's a very funny episode.
It's so funny. I actually wrote down lines, Rich, because they were so funny. I laughed out loud. Anyway, go ahead.
The comedy comes out of character, not necessarily out of the situation. And it's, I think that in some episodes we lean more towards the action stuff. In something like War World, I think that one is not as successful because it doesn't have the sort of comedy element in it. And so, this one sort of hits that sweet spot. And it's a very difficult balancing act when you're talking about a city full of talking gorillas.
Yeah, that's a tall order, I gotta say. Yeah, absolutely.
And to ask about that comedy aspect right off, because I think if people weren't a fan of Michael Rosenbaum as the Flash, by this episode they have to be, because he played that comic element brilliantly. Yeah.
He really did. He just nailed it. And that relationship between Green Lantern and Flash is sort of the crux of this episode. And I'd like to get into a little bit of sort of the background of how those writing credits ended up the way that they did.
Please.
Paul Dini was originally slated to write this one. He was very passionate about it and wanted to do it. And he got through, I think, the first draft of the outline. And then he had to reluctantly drop out of it because he was dealing with carpal tunnel issues and he couldn't write.
Wow.
So he came into my office. He was practically in tears and he was like, I'm sorry. I can't do it. I can't do it. And at this point, we were behind schedule. We had all sorts of stories in various phases of production. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? So Bruce and I sat down, we went over the material that we had so far. It wasn't working the way we wanted to, so we restructured it and beat it out the way that we wanted to. And I wrote it up. And so that was the outline, but I still didn't have a writer for it. I asked, and all my other sort of A writers were already on assignment for me, so I couldn't double dip with them. So I asked around, and Alan Burnett was working on Static Shock at the time. And he said, well, I've been working with Dwayne McDuffie, and he's really good. And he's just finished an assignment for me. So if you want to ask him, go ahead. So I said, oh, that'd be great. I was familiar with Dwayne's comic book work, but I didn't know him. So I called him up and got him on the phone. And I was like, hey, I'm doing Justice League. You want to do this? We've got a story for you. Do you want to do it? He was like, yeah, okay. And I said, okay, I'll send you the material if you have any questions. And he says, okay. And that was it. And I thought, well, this is the weirdest conversation I've ever had. It's like most writers are very enthusiastic and want, the opportunity and all of that. It wasn't until later that I found out that he had just been up all night finishing Alan's script on Static Shock.
Wow.
And I had woken him up.
Oh, okay.
And he was like, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And then he turned around and wrote the script, and we were just delighted with it. It was full of all those qualities that we were looking for. And even though there were things that were in the outline in terms of the relationship between Flash and Green Lantern and Grodd and all of that kind of things, Dwayne plussed it all the way along the way. Mm. And I think partially he was writing from experience. He had a fraught relationship with his brother, who was often getting into trouble that Dwayne had to
rescue him
from. And so that relationship that Green Lantern has with Flash is very much a little brother kind of thing. When he smacks him upside the head, it's like, yeah, you could feel that.
And that was one of the detectives I immediately recognized. I didn't even have to look it up on the credits. That's Bill Duke. Because not only did it look like you drew Bill Duke, but the voice is just, that's Bill Duke. And that was, did you reach out to him like, oh, we'd like to have him in it? Or was he a fan and said, hey, I want to do a voice? How did he get cast in that role and then get drawn as himself?
I wasn't in on that part of the casting process. And so it was always a little bit of a surprise to us with like who showed up. I mean, sometimes Andre with major parts would run it past us and say, well, what do you think about Howard Booth as Grodd? And we're like, yeah, we're on board with that.
Well, that brings up an interesting question, though, Rich, because when we were talking to Stan and other people, they would say, maybe ask Rich that because he would know. So maybe before we even go, back into our dive into the episode, you could tell us just overall what your responsibilities were, like as the producer, and what that means when somebody says, well, I produced it. What does that entail for the people who are listening? We know what a writer entails, but what does it entail that when you're producing an animated series like Justice League?
Okay, well, what it meant for me was that I was the head writer and story editor on the show, and I also had the responsibility for giving notes on storyboards. I could give input into casting, and so basically, I would meet with Bruce one-on-one and with Glenn Murakami and James Tucker, and we would sort of hash out, the things that we wanted to do on the show. So that was sort of like this core team of producers that we were setting the creative direction on it. And Bruce obviously was the lead guy, and we had to have his blessings on everything. But there was a lot of things that I brought to the table, that Glenn brought to the table, that James brought to the table. And once we had sort of set that out, then it would go to the writers and the directors and the casting and stuff like that. So that was sort of my role in it, was as part of that core team that was figuring out what the heck this show was going to be.
We were given the impression that you were very much in charge. I think Dan Reba told the story about how you open hand slapped Power's booth because he got a line wrong, and Bruce Timm lived in Fairview.
Right?
It was an odd story.
Odd.
Don't make me come out of the booth.
Clancy Brown shook every time you came in the room. It was one of those things.
No. Susan can attest to the fact that we were very differential to Andrea in those sessions. That she was the one who was driving the ship in those sessions, and we would sort of lean over and whisper in her ear and say, "Hey, let's get another take on that one," or something like that. But she had firm control of those recordings.
Yes, for sure. And yeah, I mean, we were only speaking to her. We weren't speaking to the producers, to the writer. I mean, you like Rich just said, you would see them whisper something in her ear and then she would tell you. But I mean, I was always looking for smiles. That's what I was looking for on the other side of that booth, of that, window, because that's the only way you could tell if you were like on the right path with some of this stuff.
Well, for me, the recording sessions were always really special because as a writer, that was the only time that I got to see my work performed.
Right.
And so it was sort of like hearing those things come to life and, comparing them to like what I had in my head. And in these sessions, 9 times out of 10, it was like always way better than I could have imagined, particularly when Kevin was delivering his lines. It was like, oh my God, that's just so great.
And to go that broad scope again, if with you as the producer and you were able to write episodes, and I know that Stan and Kevin Hops have talked about how you would assign these stories, were there certain stories like, oh, as the producer, I really like this one, I'm writing this story? Or how did that fall as far as the ones you particularly wrote?
Okay, well, here's the deal. Justice League was by far the most complicated show that we had attempted to that point. We'd done Batman, we'd done Superman, we'd done Batman Beyond. And while we were in pre-production for it, there was a change in management at Warner Brothers. And as part of that change in management, the budgets were slashed seriously. And so whereas there were, maybe 6 people on staff for a show like Batman or Superman, I had a budget for 2, which included me.
Ooh.
Wow.
So that meant that I was relying a lot more on freelancers to write the scripts. And there are a lot of really good freelancers out there, but it's a different thing when they're not living in that world the whole time, in order to get that tone right and to sort of get the what the show was and all of that. And Dwayne was like a remarkable exception in that he figured it out and nailed it on the first go around. And that's why I was eager to bring him on in the second season when we had the opportunity to expand the and hire a second writer. But what that meant was that in the first season, I literally didn't have time to write any scripts, that I was busy coming up with the stories and rewriting all of the freelance scripts. So a lot of, not to take anything away from the freelancers, but, on something like Enemy Below with Kevin and Paradise Lost, I had very heavy hands in writing those episodes or rewriting those episodes to sort of get that tone figured out and down. So, there's not a script in the first season that doesn't have my fingerprints all over
it. Well, Kevin was telling us, and it stuck with me, that originally he had thought about the hand, Aquaman cutting off his hand to save Wonder Woman. And that was, but it was always about family, and that was like, no, you're not, that was vetoed, because it had to be for his child. But it was interesting to hear little tidbits like that because, wow.
That's the thing is that Kevin always always comes to the table with a lot of ideas, and I appreciate that. It's like that creativity is what we're hiring him for. And, it doesn't mean that we're going to accept all of them. But in terms of the Aquaman thing, particularly, I remember early on in the meeting, we knew we had to do an Aquaman episode because, he was one of the original core members of the Justice League, and we had to salute that. And at the time we were talking about the hook hand and like whether or not we were going to do it. And Bruce was like, the hook hand is stupid. We're not doing the hook hand. And, it's dumb.
Oh,
and
Bruce.
I was like, and I was like, well, yeah, you're right. It is dumb unless we show him doing it himself. And Bruce sat up and went, we could do that? And I was like, sure, why not? And so then that got the juices started, and we started talking about the story and laying it out. And it was like, yeah, he saw Aquaman as being sort of an underwater Conan, and Conan the Barbarian.
Right.
And he thought that would be the most badass thing ever for him to cut off his own hand. And, he just needed to get over the fact that it wasn't done with as much finesse in the comic books. And so once we found this sort of in, he was like very excited about it.
Wow. See, I love that kind of stuff. And one of the things to kind of circle it and bring it back a little bit to the episode, Brave and the Bold, obviously a very famous DC comic book that ran for many, many years. When I think of it, I always think of it's Batman and Mr. Miracle, Batman and Black Canary, Batman and Firestorm. It was a Batman team up toward the end. But in the 60s, Flash was pretty regular. What was it about this episode that made you decide, or Paul, or whoever it was, to use Brave and the Bold for this particular episode?
Well, the original working title was Guerrilla Warfare. And, we thought that was a little too cute for the room. And then we were looking at the fact that this is really like a team-up episode with Flash and Green Lantern. And, of course, when you think about team-ups, Brave and the Bold is the team-up show. It doesn't, normally it was Batman, but it was the idea that you're pairing two heroes up in an unusual adventure. And that's sort of what we were keying off of. And was like, yeah, that felt really, really right. And also the fact that the structure of this episode was such that the first half of it is a complete two-hander. You only see Flash and Green Lantern in it. And then in the second, we bring in some of the other League members. And so it really feels like you've got the Brave and you've got the Bold. And so it just sort of like, and also there's a lot of fan service to the sort of Silver Age Flash comics in particular.
Yes.
In this, and sort of like referencing that sort of old school DC felt like it was in character with this episode.
Yeah, I got that in my notes because I love when Flash gets hit with the gun in the very first episode. We see the lightning hitting the thing and becoming the Flash. We've got the Funhouse mirrors, which reminds me of the cover of Justice League #7, that classic Silver Age, when Wonder Woman and Green Lantern and Flash are all looking at themselves and they're disproportionate in the mirror. And then we had, when he becomes the ape, that was a little later in the run from the JL Ape miniseries in I think 1998, when Grodd did turn all the Justice League into apes.
There was an earlier Flash Ape comic back in the 60s.
Oh, okay.
So,
see, I missed that one.
Yeah. So, all of those images were taken from the early Flash covers. And it was interesting because Julius Schwartz, the editor at DC, had this, not really a rule, but he thought that comics with gorillas on the cover would sell better on the newsstand.
I've heard that before.
And so he was always like coming up with gorillas and things like that. And so we sort of leaned into that as well.
Well, that whole segment of the transition of Flash transitioning with the mirror and the puppets, and God, that just, really took my breath away. That whole sequence was just extraordinary.
So that one was interesting because that was something that I think it was Bruce storyboarded that particular. It might have been Dan, but I think maybe it was Bruce who storyboarded that particular segment. In the original script, we had him zapped and it flashed to him in the lab being struck by lightning, which is the Flash origin thing. And we were like, well, that's good, but we need to expand upon it. And so we started talking about like what we could do in that area, and talked about getting all of these sort of like weird, almost psychedelic images that came directly from the comic book covers into it. And so we sort of, from that seed idea of him being zapped and having a little bit of a flashback, we expanded that into this whole sequence, which then I think it was actually boarded before the script was written.
Oh, wow.
And then was incorporated into the script.
Wow.
Is that unusual to have the storyboard come before the script? Or is that just kind of either way, 50-50?
It's really unusual. It hardly ever happens. But in this case, we were talking about it. And I think, like I said, my memory is that it was Bruce who drew that up, that he was sort of striking while the iron was hot. And it was like, this was what we were talking about. He wanted to get his thoughts down on it.
Wow. Well, I mean, I got to say the voice cast for this also just, I mean, I think they always stood out to me. I mean, when you're rewatching them, especially, it's just, you can't get over the talent pool that they got for the show. But I have to say, like, no one disappointed. Everyone was so damn good. I mean, Virginia Madsen, that voice is just, wow. And, you know, I mean, James, like this cast, did you see this cast?
Well, I kept thinking, it's so sad to me that both of our gorilla leads have now passed. We've lost, sadly, Powers Booth and David Ogden Stiers.
Yeah,
it's because obviously we'd love to have them on for this episode, if anything, but just the two of their voices, because I always picture David as Major Winchester on MASH,
right?
And then Powers Booth, he ended up being in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. later on after the run of Justice League, but just such voices. The whole cast is amazing.
Amazing.
So yeah, it was always like opening a Christmas present when we found out who got cast in these things. It's like, oh, really?
I know. I mean, that's how I felt when I was sitting next to Ed Asner, you know, or whomever. I mean, you just felt like I was pinching myself the whole time. Can I just say a couple of lines that really made me laugh out loud? Can I just share those lines? Because Martian, we have a Martian's phone number on speed dial. I mean, hello, that's genius. And then Flash, don't heckle the supervillain. I love that.
I got that one down as well.
I was so envious of these funny lines because I never got to be funny on this show. And so they were so funny.
Don't heckle the supervillain was Dwayne's. In the outline, it said Flash razzes Grodd. You know, so we didn't know what the line was going to be, and when he sent that in, it was just like, oh my God, that's perfect.
It's perfect. Yeah. And I did get a few great Heras, so I really appreciated that. And I did notice
really a good one when you're doing the last push on the rocket ship.
Oh,
you know, that was huge. That was a good one.
That was a good one. And but I have to say, like, some of the other lines I had, which I remember having those kinds of lines where they were just very simple, like, come in, Batman. You know, like when you're just talking on the comlink, and those lines I cringe sometimes when I see myself when I can watch myself doing it now, because I'll sometimes be too loud or too quiet. And it's like, what was I thinking? It's just, yeah.
Well, again, to be fair, you didn't have the visuals of what was going on at that point. So you didn't know like what the ambient noise was or anything unless Andrea gave you some guidance on that.
And she did. And I still, a couple of times, even with Andrea, I still would, you know, muck it up a few times, but you
did fine, Susan.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Yeah. And I have to say, when Bruce yells out Diana, and not to get ahead of ourselves, but in the scene where he's looking for her, I have to tell you, I got chills. I mean, for so many reasons, but I mean, that was just so moving. And we always tell people that we're going to be recording with our guests, and if they have any questions for our guests, they should give us them on social media, and we can ask. And one of the questions was about Wonderbat, because this episode is kind of the first hint of that. And I wondered if you could, as I have a vested interest and a passion for it, if you could share a little bit about that and how that came to be, because you were one of the few people in the room where it happened.
Well, that was interesting because, and I remember this specifically, that the scene was written as, that she's under the rocket. We don't know whether she's dead or alive at this point. There's a moment of that, and then she breaks out and all of that, and everybody breathes a sigh of relief and all of that. And it was in storyboard, actually, that little bit with the kiss was added. Mm-hmm. So it was after the script. And so we were looking at the board, and there was a lot of debate about whether or not we should do that or not. And Dan particularly fought very hard for it. He was like, this is such a good moment. This is great. And Bruce was like, well, I don't know, that takes us down a direction that I'm not sure we want to go. And I was like, well, it wasn't in the script, but it is kind of cool. And so we kicked it around back and forth. And then finally we were like, well, let's let it sit and see what happens. And it was so well done because it the way it's staged is that, she looks at him, she sees the mud and the dirt on his hands from it. So she knows what he was doing there, and she acknowledges that. And there's something very sweet about it. And the thing is that if it had been Superman, it wouldn't have had the impact because it wouldn't have cost Superman anything. He's invulnerable.
Right.
But Batman really scraped up his knuckles doing that and doing it for Diana, even though she didn't really need it. But she acknowledged that. So I thought it was very sweet. And it took us in a direction that nobody was expecting when we started the series. I mean, a lot of the relationships that developed among the cast developed through just the process of working with you guys and working with the characters and everything like that, and seeing where there was a spark. And so that was kind of like one of those things that was discovered along the way.
And so then where does it go from there? In other words, you have the kiss and you have that moment, and the fans obviously take notice. And then then you kept going with it, but not in a crazy overt way, not where it was like Green Lantern and Hawkgirl, where it was a very established relationship. It was like really just flirtation here and there and some sweetness here and there. What were those discussions like? Like, you could have left it at just the kiss.
That's sort of where we were at that point, was like, well, this works within this story. Let's leave that. And you have to remember that there's a year's amount of time until we start getting feedback, because that's how long it takes to go through production for us to actually see what it's going to look like on the screen, for it to get on the air, for us to get reactions from the fans and stuff like that. So we're sort of flying blind at this point and just sort of going, well, that seems to work for this. And we'll take another step when it seems appropriate. And there was something about the connection between you and Kevin that sort of lit up, and we kept going back to it and going, well, let's give it a little moment here. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Let's just give it a little moment, because that seems to work. And then as we started thinking about it a little bit more, and we can get into this, when we talk about season 2 and stuff like that, that this was a relationship that, as far as I'm aware, was not ever really explored in the comic books, that
Right.
everybody was always pairing up Wonder Woman and Superman, and the more we thought about it, we thought, no, this actually makes a lot more sense, that we're always looking for, what do the characters bring to the situation? How do they play off of each other, and what are the sparks there? And in this case, it felt right, and it made a lot of sense to all of us. And so we just sort of kept poking it. And luckily the fans reacted very positively to it. And as you can say, the rest is history.
Yeah, right. And here we are all these years later, #WonderBat, because the fans really did respond. And I responded to it because it gave me, Susan, a chance to have a different aspect to the character. So in addition to being superhero, and a friend and other things, a daughter, any aspect you can play of a character, it just gives you more. And it's just so enjoyable. Like, I loved scenes with Hippolyta. I loved being at Themyscira. So I loved having scenes with Kevin, and I loved having that flirtatious side that he and I got to do together. It was it felt like a gift from the gods, but in sense, it was a gift from the writers. So thank you.
The writing gods.
The writing gods. It really was. I mean, I remember seeing Dan at a Comic-Con, and I had that picture of WonderBat that I signed at the Comic-Con, and he said, did you ever hear the story about how that kiss came to be? And I said, no. And he sat there and he told me about the room and what it was like, and then how Bruce wasn't 100% sure he wanted to keep going with it, and how Dan tried so hard to convince him, and in the end he relented, Bruce, and said, okay, we'll keep it in. But it just feels as magical today talking about it as it did all those years ago playing it. It really does.
Well, sometimes you just get dumb lucky also.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, and we will revisit this down the road as we go into other episodes that, feature them more. But I just had to ask because somebody out in our audience asked. There were a couple of people who were asking about it. James, speaking of which, do you want to continue on with our discussion about the episode, or do you want to open it up to a couple of the questions that we got? Because we actually have a lot for Rich.
We did. Yeah, we can intersperse them. I think a couple of questions from our listeners might strike a conversation between the three of us. We had at Trumbull Comic said, I'd like to hear Rich's reaction to the "get your hands off me, you damn dirty human," or what, they didn't say damn dirty human, but the Sullivar's line that was popping up in Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes shortly before this episode aired. Obviously, it's a famous line. I think it was Charlton Heston's character in the original Planet of the Apes, but Tim Burton left that in. It's just such an iconic line. I don't say whose line was it, but what was was that just a little homage that you decided to add, or how did that line come about?
Well, that line, I think, was in the original Paul Dini outline draft, and it just, the connection between apes and humans, it made sense to do that as a flip. I'm going to sort of jump forward a little bit to Grodd's speech to the masses in Central City, which was something that Dwayne really added in there that I thought was brilliance, which is that speech is full of slurs and aspersions that historically were thrown at Black people in America. And so he was using that as a platform to criticize racism in America, as he experienced it as a Black man, and from his point of view and all of that. And so by having all of that venom spewing out from the gorilla, it sort of laid it bare that, he's saying all these things about the humans, and obviously they're not true.
Another listener question we had, because as soon as we announced these, whether it's a voice actor like Phil or a writer like you or Kevin or Stan or one of the directors like Dan, we always get a bunch of great questions. And we had one from at Joseph MP4. The O in Joseph is a 0, I believe, but I'm just going to pronounce it Joseph MP4. He wanted to know who wrote the Flash tripping sequence. Let him know it was a good episode. Thanks for the hard work the team put in to make it such a solid show. So as you kind of addressed, so that he doesn't think we ignored his question, that was storyboarded and then kind of written afterwards. So it was storyboarded by Bruce. So technically it was Bruce's brainchild, yes?
It came out of the conversations that we were having as we were developing the story. In other words, he and I were sitting down and talking about it, and James and Glenn. And out of that conversation, we came up with this framework, this concept of it, and Bruce went and drew it up so that we then had it, and then it got incorporated into the script.
And
okay,
we have another one at Steely Dill, DYL. Said, was anyone besides Powers Booth considered to play Grodd? Which I was always questioning, because if you've got David Ogden Stiers and Powers Booth, were those the parts they came in to read for? Did they switch and David was originally supposed to be Grodd and Powers Booth was supposed to be Solivar? How did were you in on the casting process for this episode?
I remember that Powers Booth was floated as a Grodd, and everybody was like, "Oh yeah, let's go with that." So
yeah,
I don't think there was any question about that.
And then David for Solivar, was he one of the people who auditioned, or was it offered to him? Do you know on that one?
I'm sure it was just offered. I mean, they didn't need to try him out, but the thing is that a lot of times you needed to have backups because you never knew who was going to be available and who would say yes. So I'm sure that Andrea had a list of people and was like, okay, well, we'll start with this and we'll work our way through it until we get somebody in. But in this case, I think the first choice was the one that we were able to come up with. So it was great.
Yeah, it was the A-team. I noticed Superman was not there because I noticed, like, for every episode, there's always one or two, on the bench, which I understand now and I've made my peace with.
Well,
but it's always interesting to see who's playing and who's not playing, if I can continue with this sports metaphor.
Yeah, I'm going to go with more of a game show metaphor and say that what we considered the show was what I would describe as a wheel show. That you take the wheel of fortune and you spin it around.
Yeah.
And whoever comes up, if it's Wonder Woman or if it's Superman or whatever it is, it's a Wonder Woman episode or it's a Superman episode. And then the other characters become the supporting characters because we've got 7 stars.
Right.
On the team. And we always try and balance it out so that everybody gets their moments.
With this being sandwiched kind of in the middle of the season-ish, it's the 14th and 15th episode, a little towards the end. When you're creating the stories, you mentioned the wheel that you'd turn and, this is going to be a Wonder Woman episode. This is going to be, there wasn't necessarily what I love about, especially this first season, is unlike Justice League Unlimited, there's that Cadmus through line throughout the whole thing. This one didn't have a through line, which I enjoy because if I want to watch, Fury, boom, I'm going to put that one on. You can watch parts 1 and 2. You don't need to have seen Secret Origins. Was that a deliberate decision on the part of the writers and the producers?
Well, we had something similar to the Cadmus arc written into the original Bible, but a lot of what we were trying to do here was that our concept of how to actually produce this, because that was a big concern of us, how to do this as big as we could, was to picture each 2-parter as a mini movie. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to be able to stand alone on its own as an experience. And for me, what I was describing, what I wanted was that sort of buzz that you got when you read a really classic comic book for the first time and you were like, oh my God, that's such a great story. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of it was moving pieces around to make sure that every single character in the story had something important to do, some contribution to the story, to the arc of the story, to the characters. And if they if we couldn't find a way to fit them in, then we would just say, okay, they're off doing something else. Because then we're doing better service to the characters that are there. Because there's only so much screen time that you have. And so, we really spent a lot of time trying to figure out, like in this story, we've got Flash and Green Lantern, then we need a supporting cast. And so we went with Wonder Woman and Hawkgirl and Martian Manhunter and Batman. And so that was really all we needed on that one. We didn't need Superman, because once you bring Superman into the mix, it's going to change what happens in that part of the story. This needed to be a struggle for them. And so we always were making that determination each step along the way. And then we had to balance, like, okay, who haven't we seen in a while? Who haven't we featured in a while, and all of that. And so it was a big juggling act to try and figure that out. But in terms of like the continuing story and all of that, we were picturing it more as building the world step by step. That we started with one thing, and each one added a piece. And like the Wonder Bat thing added an element that we could follow up later. It was not something that we were necessarily planning on doing, but we were discovering things as we went along.
Can I ask you how the flashbacks, how telling things in flashback, which I happen to love, I'm a big fan of film noir, and film noir, there's often that beaten up character in the beginning who, over a glass of bourbon retells the story. How did that, because I love that device. Whose idea was that? Because it was used so often and I loved it every time. How did that come about? Do you remember?
A lot of times it had to do with the fact that there's a lot of world building that goes on here. That we've got Gorilla City here, which is sort of like, in a way, it feels like in this version that it's DC's version of Wakanda. It's this lost city in the middle of deepest Africa that's hidden away from the rest of the world with high technology and stuff like that. And so we don't really want to spend a lot of time sort of stopping the story in order to get that out of the way. And sometimes the simplest way is just to have somebody relate it and say, okay, here's this story. Here's the good guys. Here's the bad guys. Let's move on with it. So a lot of times it's a matter of expedience to just sort of do an exposition dump and then move on. But you always don't want it to not feel like an exposition dump. You want it to feel like it's something that's important that somebody's sharing with somebody else.
Absolutely. Well, another thing that I wanted to bring up was we always ask our guests how they came to do what they're doing, because I get asked all the time, how'd you get into voiceover? What would you recommend for somebody who wants to do voiceover? And there's certainly people listening that would love to do what you do, that would love the career you have had and enjoyed and are still doing. I know I don't want you to have to go on and on about it. I don't want to take your time, but if you could just share a little bit of your origin story as to how you ended up in that room with Bruce Timm, writing the Justice League and creating that universe for us.
Well, the sort of short version is that 40 plus years ago, when I got into the animation business, it was a much different landscape than it is right now. Believe it or not, nobody wanted to be doing it at that time. Mm-hmm. And they literally were hiring people off the street. And that has to do with the fact that the animation industry had been shrinking since the 1950s. And by the late 70s, early 80s, all of the people who had been in the animation industry were getting to the age where they were going to retire, and there was nobody to replace them. And so the studios were hiring people literally like out of college and stuff like that in order to, get workers, which they needed. So I graduated from American Film Institute with a degree in cinematography, but I'd always enjoyed animation and had studied animation. And I got a job as a storyboard artist at Filmation, just by walking in and saying, "Hey, you need any artists?" After doing that for a few years, I got tired of trying to make really bad scripts work in storyboard. In other words, trying to fix the problems with the stories in storyboard. So I said, I could probably do better than that. And my drawing skills are okay, but they are sort of limiting. And so I moved over to the writing side and started writing on the Smurfs and on Super Friends, and had a very good career writing from that point. On Super Friends, I was writing for Alan Burnett, who was editing it at the time. When Batman the Animated Series started up, I was unfortunately busy at another studio, so I wasn't able to take part in that. But when Superman started up, he said, "Hey, do you want to write a Superman?" And I was like, "Heck yes, I'd love to."
Wow.
So I wrote the first standalone Brainiac story, and they liked it. And so I started in the first season. I did a bunch of freelance stories for them. And then in the second season, I was brought on as a story editor. I've always been a big comic book fan, particularly a fan of the work of Jack Kirby. And I had actually written like the introduction of Darkseid into Super Friends.
That was on Galactic Guardians. That was you?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh.
So they knew that I knew that stuff. So when it came to Superman and they were starting to fold in the Fourth World stuff, I got assigned to do basically all of the Fourth World stories in Superman, the animated series. And those ones were particularly complicated stories. They were mostly two-parters. They were epic. They were big stuff. And so I started working sort of closely with Bruce on those stories. And he's a huge Kirby fan also. And so we shared that. And so when it came time to do Justice League, Alan, who had been working with Bruce and company for many years, 10 years at this point, was ready to move on and do something else. And so there was an opening. And because I was familiar with it, with the team, and knew that sort of big scale storytelling that they were looking for, I got the chance to do Justice League. And I've always been grateful for it. And it's one of the highlights of my career, I think.
Wow. That Superpowers series, Galactic Guardians particularly, was my first introduction to DC comic characters. I mean, you were working in Calabac and Desaad and everything like that in that episode, and it corresponded with the Superpowers figures that Kenner was putting out at the time. But that was, for me, that was my childhood. When I see that Kirby look, or even the Jose Luis Garcia Lopez art that they drew on the boxes for those glorious Superpowers figures, it makes me so happy. And I joked with Alan Burnett that he killed Superman before it was cool, because they had that episode where they launched him into the sun as they thought he was dead from kryptonite poisoning. So loved all that. And the fact that you got to be involved in that, I'm incredibly envious. Just such a cool time.
Okay, so Rich, this is why I'm doing the podcast with James, because that geekiness that you're hearing now is so fantastic. And, I don't have it for this. I don't know this genre like he does. And so it makes me so happy. You can see I'm smiling ear to ear, because watching him have that reaction to the fact that you were involved with something that he has loved since childhood is so special. It's so, so sweet.
Well, I do remember, Susan, that after we hired you for Wonder Woman, that I pulled you aside in the first session, and I said, "You don't know this yet, but this is going to change your life."
and it did. Oh. And it did in a huge way. And as you said earlier, I mean, I've just never not been grateful. There's just such gratitude for this show and for the people we got to work with. And like I said earlier, the writers, chief among them. I mean, because without them, I don't think we'd be talking like we are right now. And when you would see a finished show after it was animated, what was your reaction the first time you saw one of your scripts animated? Because I know how incredible it was for the actors to see ourselves up there, or not ourselves, but our characters, and how extraordinary that felt. What was it like for you to see your scripts animated?
Justice League was special in that the team had been together for so long. It was a well-oiled machine.
Mm-hmm.
And every step along the way, it was an additive process. That people brought ideas, they brought energy, they brought passion to it. And it just kept getting better and better and better. I've been on shows where, you look at the final product and you go, oh, they sort of missed the boat on that. That wasn't really what I was expecting or intending there. But in Justice League, it was always way better than I could have imagined. And I had such a sense of pride being associated with that, and more particularly with those people who, like Dan and James and Glenn and Bruce, who were so talented and so expert at this genre of storytelling that it was always just a thrill to see the rough cut, to see the final version, and the voices all brought it to life. But you said that you were talking with the composers on it, and with animation, I always feel that the music can add like 40% to what you're feeling on it. And I can attest to that, having seen the rough cut without the music and seeing it with the music, that it gives you that, because animation is a drawn thing. And like, you look at Batman and he's got wide eyes and a little, slit of a mouth there, that you have to bring your emotion to that. And the music helps guide you to that. And so, everybody was just so passionate about this and bringing their A game that I was never disappointed.
Wow. Well, if you don't mind me asking, because you did, talk about your collaboration with Bruce, and Bruce is such a mysterious figure to so many, Bruce Timm, he's such a mysterious figure to so many people, so many fans. He's not on social media. He does some Comic-Cons, but not for a while. And, he's like, in the Wizard of Oz, he's like, so can you talk a little bit about your collaboration with him and how that worked, and what was it like?
It took me a while to figure Bruce out, because he is very private. He's very closed. And I'm not sure I ever did entirely figure it out. But one of the things that I learned along the way was that he would do well if you could associate it to something else that he had seen and was familiar with. And let me give you an example here. In the Amazo story, in the second season, I wanted to do Amazo. And he was like, no, we're not going to do Amazo. Amazo's stupid. And Bruce does not sugarcoat things. And so, he's like that. But I said, I agree with you. He's stupid looking. I said, but he's basically the same character as the one in the Marvel comics called the Super Adaptoid. And he goes, oh, Super Adaptoid's really cool. And I'm like, yeah, Super Adaptoid is really cool. And it's the same as Amazo. Let's do Amazo as Super Adaptoid. And he's like, yeah, that would be really neat. And so that was finding a way around his prejudices, I guess, would be the way that I would put it. In War World, which I think is probably our most problematic episode, we never got to a meeting of the minds on what that story was supposed to be. And that was really the problem, that Stan and I, in that one, we wanted it to be more like the tone of Thor Ragnarok, which is kind of satirical in its approach. And Bruce wanted it to be deadly serious. And so it ended up being a long slog of people punching each other out, and not really a lot of fun for us to work on, and not fun for the audience. But if I had been able to say, this is actually kind of like that Fantastic Four episode where he goes to the gladiator planet, then he might have said, oh yeah, I see how that would work. So we just didn't get on the same page for that one. But a lot of it was sort of like feeling each other out, finding where our common ground was and where we could take the story that we agreed on it. And that was always a challenge. The reason why he had a long, successful relationship with Paul Dini and with Dwayne McDuffie was that they were great at improvising and throwing out witty lines of dialogue and things like that. And for all of his confidence, Bruce is always questioning everything, and wants to revisit things. I tend to be very good at structure, at figuring out what the moving pieces of the story are and things like that. And once I've got that done, I'm not as good at the sort of little tweaks of dialogue after the fact. It's sort of like, oh my God, I've got other things to think about. Don't bring me back to that thing. And so from that standpoint, we weren't quite as good a match as him and Paul were, or him and Dwayne. But I'm, again, I feel very positive and grateful for the time that I spent on the show, and I'm very proud of the results.
As you should be. And I can't get over how much the industry has changed. You said they were literally hiring people off the streets back in the day. And when you think about, like, if a young person studying animation right now at a college and wants to do that with their life, very different trail than what you guys did, I would imagine.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I do not envy anybody who's trying to get into the industry right now. It can be done. If you are talented and persistent, it can be done, but it's a struggle.
It's interesting how much has changed too, because again, part of it is because of my nostalgia as a kid, but I always think of the 80s as that golden age. And it's interesting. I never thought about it from the standpoint that you put of all the people who were doing the Flintstones and Looney Tunes and Hanna-Barbera stuff were retiring and phasing out around that time. Because I think of all these great cartoons from the 80s, like Bionic 6 and Transformers and Thundercats and things like that. And it was almost a renaissance. And I guess it's because of the influx of talent from people like yourself and your contemporaries who stepped in to fill that void.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you look at what the storyboard department at Filmation was like when I got in there, basically all of the people who were in that department went on to long careers and distinguished careers and working on, really important shows. I mean, Bob Klein was the supervisor. He went on to do a lot of the Disney animation movies and designs and things like that. Carl Gears went on and did the Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which was a flagship show for them. Tom Minton worked on Sylvester and Tweety and was sort of the template for the Brain in Pinky and the Brain. Eddie Fitzgerald was part of John Cristofalusi's crew that did the Ren and Stimpy and all of that. So all of these people went on to do other things that were like really important, and I was part of that group,
which has to feel so fantastic. I mean, do you? You're on Facebook. We will get to how people can reach you, but you are on social media, correct? Because I see you on Instagram.
Not very much. I mean,
right.
I'm not
but
very
once
active.
in a while, I'll see that you liked something, and I'm like, oh, there's Rich.
Yeah.
Because I just want to. I always ask people who were behind the scenes. You do know how beloved the show is, and how appreciated and respected you and the other writers and directors and musicians and everything else, how deeply the audience feels about all of you. I hope you know that.
Yeah, I have experienced that, more than once, having somebody come up and say, "Oh, you wrote my childhood."
Right.
That means something. I used to always say that writing in animation, or children's animation, was sort of like planting time bombs. That you do something that it lays there for a long time. You don't know when, but at some point it's going to blow up and make an impact on somebody. And there are these memories that are like buried deep within people.
Yes.
That we've been able to help shape how they experience life.
100%, and it's still going on. I mean, what is always so brilliant to me is how many generations we meet at Comic Cons. The mom and dad come up with the kid and they say, we were huge fans of the show. Now my kid's watching with us. I mean, it just keeps going, and it's streaming now on, 2 providers, so 2 services. So it just,
yeah, I'm grateful that it's finding a new audience.
It is. It always is. And it has the original audience. So that's very sweet too.
I think that's a testament to the timelessness of the scripts and the storytelling. When you tell good stories, they are ageless. They don't, that's dated now. None of these stories are, because they are about heroism, and they're about sacrifice, and they're about doing good for the sake of doing good. Along the way, just with some really cool villains and a lot of other stuff mixed in that make it such a compelling tale.
And lots of things blowing up.
Right. That always helps. And gorillas on the cover.
And getting electrocuted. Hello.
Yes. Yes.
I think we all got electrocuted in this episode, except for George.
Yep.
he was tired of getting electrocuted. That's why they had him sit out, to be honest. He couldn't do it again. Well, as we wrap this up, do you have any final thoughts on this particular episode itself, Rich? Be it something that struck you as you rewatched it that was like, wow, this was really good because, or something that why you think, you mentioned in the beginning this was an underrated episode. Do you think it's just because it was the way it was situated in the season? What are your kind of final thoughts as we wrap up this particular topic?
Yeah, I think that because it sort of sits neatly in the middle there, that it's not one of the huge epic episodes that, like the 3-parters and stuff like that. But it feels solid to me all the way through. And I really enjoyed watching it again. And like I said, it was that mix of character, action, and humor that seems so well balanced in this. And I bring that a lot, to the whole team. Like I said, everybody contributed something along the way in this. And it's one of those sort of magical things where, you can't really put your finger on it. You just said, yeah, it worked. And against all odds, I mean, what would the odds of a show about a talking gorilla?
Yeah. When you put it like that, Rich.
It sold comic books, though. Ask Julie Schwartz. It sold comic books. Come on.
Exactly. Well, I mean, we love that stuff. And, hopefully that love came through in this episode.
Well, I think that's what always came through in every episode was, the people at the helm felt passionately about what they were writing, that they were so knowledgeable about what they were writing, and they respected their audience. And I think that always came through in each episode. Yeah. And so it's been such a treat to revisit them all, if I may throw out our title once again. Rich, I thank you so much for doing this with us. And you mentioned other episodes down the road. We hope to have you back again and again and again.
Yes.
If that's okay. You don't have to tell us on we don't want to put you on the spot, but just blink if you're interested in going back, because we really would love to have you back on.
Anytime. I'm pleased to talk with you guys about this stuff. And, it's always a pleasure to talk with people who are enthusiastic about it. And, I don't get out to Comic-Cons mainly because of COVID caution, I would say at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm hoping at some point I'll be able to get out onto the con circuit, because it would be nice to be able to shake hands with the fans and talk to them.
100%. And they would love to talk to you and shake your hand. I know that for a fact. So here's to that happening, and here's to you returning. Because, it's just been a pleasure, and it's gone by really fast. And we look forward. I mean, Star-Crossed. Can we just mention
Yes.
Star-Crossed?
Oh, yes.
Can we just mention Star-Crossed?
Yes. Pencil me in for that one.
Yes,
We
you
might
are
have to
in.
do a 3-part episode just on our own, because I know Phil immediately claimed that one too when we had him on last time. He's like, I'm coming back for Star-Crossed. So I think that's
Absolutely.
And Maria.
And Maria,
We have to
obviously.
have Maria on. 100%. Well, thank you, Rich. And, just our pleasure to have you on. And thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, and I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Sounds
Thanks.
great.
Great seeing you.
Bye.
There he goes. It's just the information that people like him have. It's so, you're not going to get this on any other show, as you like to say.
This is what we do here, folks. I know. Isn't it cool? I mean, it just feels cool to hear what happened inside that room. And very few people can share what those experiences, like somebody like Rich. I mean, he was, as people have said, ask Rich, he'll tell you, he was the one that, was making those decisions and setting the guidelines and all of that. So how lucky are we that we get to sit and listen to Rich Fogel talk about Justice League?
Yeah. Guillermo del Toro came out. He was talking about the importance of physical media, DVDs, and having those, and having the books and actual physical things to hold in your hand rather than just streaming it, downloading it. And I feel like one of the things I used to go out and buy the DVDs specifically for was you'd get the director's commentary or the actor's commentary. I feel like that is what we are bringing to the fans. I'm not saying that to pat ourselves in the back, that I am a fan of what we're doing. And hopefully the people listening out there are as excited as I am to hear from Kevin Hops and Stan Berkowitz and Dan Reba and Rich Fogel, hopefully Paul Dini and Bruce Timm down the road, and people like you who were also in the room, and Phil and Michael. I'm so excited that we're doing this, because if I wasn't part of it, I would want to listen to this and hear it.
And so would I. I mean, and I just think that that there are so many people out there for whom the show still matters so much. I think if it weren't relevant, and I think it becomes even more relevant when people are going through a hard time, and when the world feels like it's not totally safe, and it just feels that right and wrong thing is pretty powerful. Like you said, good stories, and it never gets old. So I just say, let's keep going. I think we should, right? We should do another one.
I think we have to. We have to at this point. We're in it this deep. We might as well keep going. At least until we get Bruce and Paul on, then we'll call it quits after that. Our work is done.
Oh man, yeah, we have to. We'll work on that. We'll work on that.
We are, yes.
So this is a wrap. I think we're good to go. I mean, do we have to tell our social media stuff again?
We can just again, because I always feel like every episode that we do is someone's first. They just found it.
Yeah, you're right.
You know what? What's this about? So hopefully, if this is your first episode, let us just say welcome to you. We appreciate the fact that you've listened to this episode, and the good thing is you've got more content to go backwards and listen to, and check out our other interviews that we've done. You want to go first? Give your socials and where people can keep up with you.
Yeah, and before I even do that, I just want to encourage people to subscribe to the podcast. And if you're enjoying the podcast and you're inclined, please leave a review, because that just feels awesome. And it just is important to us as we're building an audience to get those numbers and to get that audience going. So please do that. And if you want to find me or chat with me, Susan Eisenberg 1, the number 1. On pretty much every platform out there. And also I have a website that I'm very proud of. It's susaneisenbergvoice.com. You can find all the episodes on there as well. And other things like if I have a Comic-Con coming up, or if you want to write me, ask me a question, you can email me there. So that's always a good place to find me.
Yeah, your website is stunning. I got to say, it's. I went and visited it the other day. It's such an impressive website.
I love that website. You know who designed it for me?
I do.
I'm not even going to try to. I'll butcher the name. So you go ahead.
Isn't it Adrian Buskey? Am I pronouncing it right? Okay, I thought so.
Yes.
I thought that was it.
Adrian Buskey designed my website, and he's the one that keeps it up to speed, and he's a gem. I got lucky. So if anyone out there who needs a website designer, he's your go-to. He's amazing. Very talented guy.
He's like my Joey V, because Joey V keeps my show running, my own show, Geek to Me Radio. He's the one who keeps me up and running when I was in the transition between radio stations. He got me the little mixing board that none of you can see right now, but that I'm working on this particular show and recording with Susan and Rich and everything on, and said, you got to keep going. You got to keep doing this. So without Joey V, there would be no Geek to Me Radio. So he's like the Alfred to my Batman.
If you will.
Yes.
All right. So tell people how they can find you.
Yes. So Geek to Me Radio, again, it's a live radio show. Back in my day, we used to turn on the box. It's a live, actual, honest to goodness radio show on an AM station. So if you're in the local St. Louis, St. Charles, greater St. Louis area, you can tune in on 550 AM, get that nice AM crackle going for you, which I know a lot of people love. Like I was talking to someone who's Gen Z, and they, no kidding, said to me, I like listening to your show on the radio because I like that old fashioned crackle, which I think is fantastic that people are enjoying the retro stuff. I love that.
I love it too. And I mean, my first love is radio. I love radio. And this is why I wanted to, that's another reason I wanted to do the podcast, because I love the idea of audio only. I mean, when we're recording, we're seeing each other, but we're only recording the audio. So it's freeing. I love it. I love that you can take us on a walk, a hike, while you're doing whatever. It's just fun. I love it.
We may have missed out on a podcast named Walking with Wonder Woman. We could have had that as our.
Hey, you never know. It could be our next venture.
our third podcast will be called. But for those of you who aren't in the greater St. Louis, St. Charles area, you can also catch it online. The website I always recommend is the landing page for everything is geektomeradio.com, geektomeradio.com. You can stream us online for those of you outside the area. So every Sunday night we do a live show, 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. It's a little out of date now because when this episode will air, but we just had Stan Berkowitz on my show talking about all of his career working on Superboy, the live action series, all the way through Batman Beyond. But we've got a lot of comic book creators, directors, writers, producers. You can go back, archive, and hear my interview with John Cleese from Monty Python. So there's always some good stuff there. We do a live show. You can catch us at ktrs.com/stream, or if the aforementioned Joey V's in the studio, you can catch us on YouTube or Facebook. So facebook.com/geektomeradio. Find Geek to Me Radio on YouTube. Hit the subscription button there and follow me there. I'd appreciate that as well. And social media handles at Geek to Me Radio.
Wow.
It's a lot. I'm a lot.
That's a mouthful.
I'm always told I'm a lot.
No, you're not. I mean, you are, but in a good way. All right. Well, I guess that's it for today, kids. And please continue to listen and to find us because the conversation continues. Stay tuned.